Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes Kissinger and the true meaning of détente, how Israel fights, politics can't stop at the water's edge, the age of amorality, Australia to double warships' fourth biggest navy since World War II, Kissinger and the true meaning of détente, foreign affairs. The concept of détente, pioneered by Henry Kissinger during the Cold War, is making a comeback in U.S. foreign policy as policymakers seek to navigate the tense relationship with China. Détente is not about friendship, but about reducing the risks of conflict and finding areas of cooperation. It involves engaging with the rival power on various issues while also being prepared to confront any attempts to expand influence. This approach recognizes the need for coexistence and containment in a world where nuclear weapons and global challenges like climate change and AI compel major rivals to work together. Détente fell out of fashion in the 1970s due to criticisms from both the left and right. Critics on the left accused Kissinger of prioritizing containment over human rights and supporting dictators. Critics on the right argued that Kissinger's policy was appeasement that enabled Soviet expansion. However, détente was successful in avoiding a world war and improving the lives of people under communist rule. It allowed the U.S. to regroup, stabilize its Cold War strategy, and create economic and technological assets that led to its victory. The lessons of détente are relevant to the current competition between the U.S. and China. While there are calls for a tough approach towards China to deter aggression, a new détente approach may be more preferable to prevent a potential conflict over Taiwan. Engaging in negotiations on various issues, including arms control, trade, technology, climate change, and space, can help reduce tensions and provide opportunities for cooperation. The U.S. and China need to find a middle ground between containment and coexistence, recognizing the limits of their power and the need for strategic stability. How Israel fights. Foreign affairs. Israel's military has long been praised for its innovative tactics and strategies, and this article explores some of the reasons behind this success. The authors argue that the culture of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, encourages creativity and adaptability, with officers often being promoted at a younger age than their counterparts in other countries. The authors also highlight the importance of the IDF's egalitarianism, as well as its streamlined structure and reliance on reservists, in fostering a relaxed culture conducive to innovation. The constant threat of war also encourages the IDF to constantly adapt and improve its capabilities. However, the authors caution against over-reliance on technology and innovation, as they argue that tactical and operational innovation alone cannot win a war. Politics can't stop at the water's edge. Foreign affairs. The role of politics in American foreign policy is often seen as detrimental to national security. However, this article argues that politics has always been a part of U.S. foreign policy and is necessary for making informed decisions. The article highlights historical examples of political debates shaping foreign policy, such as the decision to enter World War I, the Cold War containment strategy, and the debate over aiding the United Kingdom in its fight against the Nazis. The article argues that politics is a natural part of how the U.S. government makes foreign policy choices and that it is important to have healthy debates on national security issues. The article also discusses the current challenges facing U.S. foreign policy, including a lack of expertise and a diminished pipeline of talent in the Republican Party. The article calls for a revival of a healthy culture of debate and a more functional political system to address these challenges and make better foreign policy decisions. The age of amorality. Foreign affairs. The United States is facing a moral dilemma as it seeks to confront the rise of autocratic regimes around the world. President Joe Biden has emphasized the ideological nature of the great power rivalry between democracy and autocracy, but in practice, the U.S. has had to make compromises and form alliances with illiberal states. For example, in Asia, the U.S. has courted backsliding India and communist Vietnam, while in Europe, concerns about creeping authoritarianism have been muted. In the Middle East, Arab dictators are seen as vital partners. The U.S. is finding it difficult to balance its values with the unsavory means needed to defend them. The article argues that the U.S. must find an ethos that is both ruthless and realistic. It should point toward a world consistent with its values but should not be paralyzed by trying to fully embody those values in every tactical decision. The U.S. must also evaluate choices and partners against the plausible alternatives rather than utopian ideals. It should be cautious about courting countries that engage in practices it deems corrosive to the liberal order. The U.S. must also recognize that illiberal allies will be selective or unreliable allies due to their domestic models. The article concludes that the U.S. must be scrupulously honest with itself and recognize the trade-offs and compromises it is making. It suggests that the U.S. must apply a set of guiding principles, such as proportionality, marginal improvement, and honesty, in order to navigate the moral complexities of great power rivalry. Ultimately, the U.S. must find a balance between idealism and realism and emphasize its values in both word and deed in order to preserve its moral standing and influence in the world. Australia to double warships for biggest navy since World War II. Deutsche Welle. Australia has announced plans to double the size of its Royal Australian Navy surface combatant fleet, increasing the number of combat-ready warships from 11 to 26 by 2030. The move comes amid a growing buildup of naval capabilities by rivals such as China and Russia, and in response to the potential for conflict in the Pacific region. The plan includes the purchase of 3 US-designed nuclear-powered submarines as part of the AUKUS security pact with the US and UK. The expansion is expected to cost $11.1 billion Australian dollars, $7.25 billion, over the next decade and will result in a significant increase in defense spending, raising it to 2.4% of GDP by the mid-2030s. Beginning of the end as Assange case returns to court. New York Times. Julian Assange's case returns to a British court this week for a 2-day hearing to determine whether he has exhausted his right to appeal within the UK and whether he could be one step closer to being extradited to the United States. In the US, Assange faces charges under the Espionage Act of 1917 that could result in a sentence of up to 175 years in prison. The charges relate to events in 2010 when WikiLeaks published secret military and diplomatic documents leaked by Chelsea Manning. The files exposed hidden diplomatic dealings and revealed civilian deaths in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. Department of Justice accused Assange of violating the Espionage Act by soliciting and publishing secret government information. EU sanctions on Chinese firms will have little impact on Russia's war in Ukraine. South China Morning Post. Proposed European Union, EU, sanctions on Chinese companies due to their alleged connections with the Russian military will have little impact on Russia's war on Ukraine, according to the head of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Dan Smith said that it is unclear whether the Chinese leadership is open to discussions and persuasion. The EU has requested a blacklist of over 20 companies, including 3 from mainland China and 1 from Hong Kong. If approved, the companies will be prohibited from trading with the EU's 27 member states. Israel weighs Eichmann-style public trials for October 7 attackers. Bloomberg. Israelis are discussing whether to put the hundreds of Hamas fighters captured during the conflict in Gaza on trial. There are many questions surrounding such trials, such as whether they should be domestic or international and whether enough evidence remains to link individuals to specific crimes. There is also the issue that the world's view of Israel has changed since 1961, when Adolf Eichmann was tried, and it may not go as planned. Those accused of terrorism in Israel are usually tried in West Bank military courts or through regular criminal proceedings, but the brutality of the October attack has prompted calls for a special court and the revival of the death penalty. Simcha Rothman, chair of the Knesset subcommittee, believes that a trial is not necessary and that the militants should be declared unlawful or unprivileged combatants and locked away for long periods of time. There are also concerns about the availability of evidence linking individuals to crimes, which could be addressed by trying suspects under the legal doctrine known as joint perpetration. Finally, some Israeli specialists have raised the possibility of bringing genocide charges against Hamas leadership, but others believe this is not a good idea. How Iraq happened. Foreign Affairs. The Iraq War of 2003 is often seen as a disastrous mistake by the U.S., leading to widespread chaos in the country and the rise of ISIS. It is often believed that the Bush administration lied about the threat posed by Saddam Hussein and his alleged weapons of mass destruction, in order to justify a war that had been planned long in advance. However, a new book by Steve Coll, based on interviews with former officials and captured Iraqi records, argues that this is not the case. Coll claims that, while the Bush administration did believe that Saddam had WMDs, and that containment was failing, they were unaware that the dictator had destroyed most of his weapons in the 1990s. Saddam continued to give the impression of having WMDs to deter Iran, and to maintain his regime's influence in the region. Coll concludes that the Iraq War was the result of a combination of Saddam's bizarre behavior, the psychological impact of 9/11 on U.S. officials, the challenge of maintaining Gulf security and a lack of critical thinking within the Bush administration. The Iraq War has been widely criticized as a major blunder, but few have attempted to explain how such a mistake could have happened. Coll's book provides a compelling account of events leading up to the war, revealing the bizarre nature of Saddam's regime, as well as the ignorance and hubris of the Bush administration. Call's book serves as a reminder of the importance of critical thinking and self-awareness within government, and the dangers of unchecked power. Who's Afraid of Freedom? Foreign Affairs. The British political philosopher John Gray and the Yale intellectual historian Samuel Moyn, two academics turned public intellectuals, have both weighed in on what they see as the self-inflicted decline of the liberal project. Although they agree that liberal democracy has, in some sense, failed, what they mean by liberalism and what they see as its prospects diverge sharply. In The New Leviathans, Gray contends that liberalism is a fundamentally erroneous creed built on dangerous myths and illusions. Rather than bringing freedom, it has led to unfettered government power that has brought much of the world to the brink of totalitarianism. By contrast, in Liberalism Against Itself, Moyn argues that liberal thought is fundamentally sound, based as it is on ideals that are both laudable and realizable. As Moyn sees it, the present crisis has been caused not by liberalism but by its betrayal, by none other than the architects of the liberal order themselves. Abandoning their core values and principles, he argues, liberalism's champions have become timid and anxious, more concerned with fending off their enemies than winning new converts. Where Gray sees liberal states growing into ever more controlling monsters, Moyn finds them reduced and enfeebled, having presided over the tragic dismantling of the welfare state. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your friendly neighborhood observer from the 6-degree world. Today, we've covered a wide range of topics, from the concept of détente and Israel's military strategies to the moral complexities of U.S. foreign policy and the expansion of Australia's navy. We also delved into the ongoing legal battle of Julian Assange, the proposed EU sanctions on Chinese firms, the possibility of public trials in Israel, and the controversial Iraq War. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on these stories. Détente, pioneered by Henry Kissinger, is making a comeback as policymakers navigate the tense relationship between the US and China. It's about reducing conflict risks and finding areas of cooperation, a valuable lesson for both countries. Meanwhile, Israel's military success lies in its culture of creativity and adaptability, as well as its constant need to evolve due to the threat of war. The role of politics in American foreign policy is often seen as detrimental, but it is a necessary part of decision-making. We must have healthy debates to make informed choices. The US is also facing a moral dilemma in dealing with autocratic regimes, needing to find a balance between its values and the compromises needed to defend them. Australia's plan to double its navy is a response to growing naval capabilities by rivals like China and Russia. It's a proactive move to ensure security in the Pacific region. On another note, the case of Julian Assange returning to court highlights the ongoing debate on freedom of the press and the consequences of publishing classified information. EU sanctions on Chinese firms might not have a significant impact on Russia's war on Ukraine, and it remains unclear whether China is open to discussions. Additionally, Israel is considering whether to put captured Hamas fighters on trial, a decision that raises questions about evidence, the changing perception of Israel, and the pursuit of justice. The Iraq War of 2003, often seen as a major blunder, is further examined in a book by Steve Call. It sheds light on the complex factors that led to the war, including Saddam Hussein's behavior, the psychological impact of 9/11, and a lack of critical thinking within the Bush administration. Finally, the decline of the liberal project is analyzed by John Gray and Samuel Moyn, who have differing views on the fundamental nature and prospects of liberalism. In conclusion, these stories remind us of the complexities of international relations, the challenges of decision-making, and the importance of critical thinking and self-awareness. The world is a fascinating and ever-evolving place, and it's our job to stay informed and engaged. Now, it's your turn. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you agree with the revival of détente, or do you think a tough approach is necessary? How should the US balance its values with the compromises needed to defend them? And what about the expansion of Australia's navy? Do you think it's a wise move? Share your thoughts, questions, and ideas, and let's continue the discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.